Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Renegade Operative, and I'd like to welcome all survival horror aficionados to my full long-form review of Resident Evil 3 Remake. It's a no-brainer that Capcom wanted to immediately follow up on the gigantic hype that was generated from last year's release with Resident Evil 2 Remake. Resident Evil 2 Remake received critical acclaim across the board for reigniting a good balance between action and immense horror. Capcom achieved the perfect mixture that was largely received well upon feedback. We were graced with a distinctive formula that gave us old school survival horror aesthetics whilst blending modernized controls into the mix. The prospect reinstated some confidence in Capcom after batting out with previous MLG misfires pre-2017 when games like Umbrella Corps were getting greenlit. This begs the important question: how does Resident Evil 3 Remake fare amongst the massive bar of expectations that it has set upon itself? Not only does this game need to live up to the original, but it also has to live up to the quality standards set up by Resident Evil 2 Remake. First, we have to start out with the obvious, the gameplay, as I give my opinion on a few elephants in the room for better or worse. The gameplay follows a similar pattern to the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Resident Evil 2 was the known foundation, and they are sticking to those core design principles with some reused assets. All the bells and whistles from Resident Evil 2 Remake exist here in Resident Evil 3. The game requires you to fight or flight against unholy biological creatures as you do your best to avoid being damaged in the sprawling city streets. As they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you thoroughly enjoyed those moments of zombie battles in tight situations, then Resident Evil 3 does its best to increase the insurmountable odds with a bigger density in enemies. If you played the original, then you would know that Resident Evil 3 Nemesis also introduced new ideas that gave a bigger emphasis on how Jill reacts defensively. I thought that the defensive dodge in the original was extremely cumbersome, as Jill would roll into a punch by default, so I'm pleasantly surprised to say that it functions on a competent level this time around in the remake. Jill's dedicated quick step is mapped to a solitary button, and depending on your mastery, you are able to avoid enemy strikes or grab animations with a perfect counter. The timing for the perfect counter this time around is definitely airtight, so you can't just spam it at your leisure, otherwise you will end up countering right into a zombie's hands and still get bit anyway. It's much easier to maintain with a singular button press this time around. Once that is taken under advisement, it's adequate to say that this simplicity edges out the convoluted nature of the emergency dodge from Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. The original game just demanded way too many functions for defense, since they wanted you to press on multiple buttons at once. I believe you had to aim and press the action button at the same time in order to do emergency dodging. We also lost an ability from Remake 2, the ability to impale knives into zombies. Yet I think it's fine that this is gone in Remake 3. It gives you the ability to try to master the dodge instead. Let's think about it. Jill would be virtually untouchable if they decided to say, hey, let's not only give her this fancy John Wick style combat role, but let's also give her the ability to impale enemies in case they grapple her. It's all about balance here. I can see why they took it out. Another implementation that I was kind of surprised to see was the struggle mechanic finally returning in this entry. If you got bit by a zombie without a defense item in Remake 2, you were pretty much screwed and you had to take a brunt of the damage. A zombie could also bite you on the stairway, and you could have a grenade or knife and you can't do anything against him. Now you can just mash on specific prompts that will mitigate damage that Jill receives between each bite. It's a welcome addition that feels right at home in case you screw up the counters. The gunplay is largely identical to Remake 2 when they embark on that zoom feature that allows for more pinpoint criticals. There's a few minuscule additions, like the more illustrated ways to convey how you got crits on zombies with a special effect. Think of it as equivalent equivalent to a gray sandbag exploding as soon as it gets shot immediately with a hollow point. It's all about visceral, satisfying, gory glory that I'm positive that many RE fans will take the time to appreciate for how good, how satisfying this action horror combat feels right at home. Resident Evil 2 might have been deliberately slow and methodical, but you can tell that RE3 owes the machine for a fast-paced accommodation that draws a line between life or death. The graphics look nothing short of incredible, along with the performance actually being solid. If you liked Resident Evil 2 Remake, then I think there's a good chance that you'll love how this game pops out the eye candy even more. This game is no slouch on the visual prowess level in terms of environments and characters being heavily detailed. The RE engine does show some signs of minor issues with the fire effects. The fire effects in this game are not really that spectacular in some areas, if I'm being honest. That being said, Raccoon City does look nice in other locales like the opening street section. I would even go as far as to say that the neon signs and the city life popped out a lot more in this game with vibrancy compared to the original Resident Evil 2 Remake. Speaking of gore, there's still gore in this game, but there is a nitpick with it. I think the main nitpick comes from Capcom not migrating the same gore effects that was used in Remake 2. You'll notice that whenever you strike a zombie's limb, it doesn't slide off slowly like it used to in the previous entry. I assume this was done to probably save a little bit of memory since there's more enemies. There's also a remix variant mode that changes their placement and adds more enemies to the equation. It's a bit forgivable, but it is noticeable. The graphics look phenomenal outside of that, and the controls are polished to a mirror sheen, so there's no issues there in my opinion. It's easy to pick up and play. The experience really doesn't feel complicated in the slightest control wise. Exploration is a bit of a mixed bag, and you'll start to notice that this is where the omissions kick in. It's no surprise that these games were always meant to be a clear hybrid that reimagines and remakes the previous Resident Evil titles to come before it. Resident Evil 2 had design choices that omitted things from the original while playing it extra safe. It was a good game that stood on its ground despite not trying anything vastly different apart from the new gameplay conventions or reworked areas. Unfortunately, Resident Evil 3 just decides to take this up a notch and take it up to a larger scale as it strays further from the beaten path that the original established. This is where things get dodgy because half of the city streets aren't as vast as the original game. Known locales like Raccoon City Press, the clock tower, the park, the sales office, and the restaurant have all been removed for the sake of potentially streamlining the game. Sure, we've gained a little bit more in some areas like the extended hospital, the RPD, and a bigger end section with Nest 2 Electric Boogaloo. I still feel like some distinct portions within this adventure was lost in migration when some sections could have had more substance than what we got. Those key omissions, those key elements could have elevated the game to the next level, which is what we didn't get on this front. We have new areas like the burning construction site, for example, but it feels like those ruins disappear in a blur because of the breakneck pacing. Resident Evil's charm heavily lies on exploring, so even if the OG RE3 was fast paced, I think that they shouldn't have made it even faster than that in the remake. There's only really 2 puzzles in the new game, which shows that the puzzles were scrapped in the process. I didn't even like the puzzles in the original Resident Evil 3 when they started to focus on the heavy, randomly generated solutions over critical thinking, so I feel 50-50 on this philosophy. More puzzles would have been elaborate without the expense of RNG mechanics from the original. Nemesis himself, who is the main attraction here, who chases you around, kinda does it less due to those omissions I talked about earlier. That means that the titular star attraction is a little bit absent in a game that's all about him being a relentless pursuer. He still can be a nuisance like he was prior by trapping you within enclosed areas and wailing on Jill like the tattered sandwich that she is. Some folks say that Nemesis isn't as challenging because he can be stopped by one grenade on standard difficulty. However, if you try to take down Nemesis with only one grenade on Nightmare or Inferno, he'll still pursue you even after taking the immediate explosion. I think this was intentionally done to create more replayable assets via difficulty levels. I will give them the benefit of the doubt because this is integral to Resident Evil's formula, which is appreciated to some extent. You have assisted, standard, nightmare, hardcore, and inferno difficulties. Each mode is a bit more increasingly difficult than the last with the rearranged enemy formats once you play on Nightmare or Inferno. This mode allowed me to rethink my strategy because everything wasn't the same anymore on harder modes, with enemies showing up earlier than expected that might show up like later in a level, like you might see a Hunter Gamma a little bit earlier than expected. This was taken from the page of Devil May Cry. It feels like it was ripped from the book of DMC, and honestly it felt refreshing to see arranged modes back into the mix yet again with Resident Evil. The thing that breaks the notable challenge that came from S+ ranking RE2 is the ability to purchase things from the shop after completing the game for RE3. The OG game had a shop for the Mercenaries mode, so it wasn't uncommon to snag infinite items at your own leisure. The problem is that you're not penalized for using them in Resident Evil 3 Remake, so you could blaze through the game on higher difficulties with the infinite launcher. It's really lazy game design. It really mitigates the effect of the special weapons if you can shoot everything and gain an easy S rank with the infinite RPG. It feels like stuff like this should have been tested more. It should have been a tougher unlock awarded to you after reaching a very high plateau within the game and being awarded this trophy. Nope. Who needs adversity, right? You could just grind your ass off for points and gain an easy platinum with no special weapon penalty. That is lazy. Despite this being a very fun, very meticulous game to play, I would propose that this is where Resident Evil 3 Remake suffers the most. Omitting stuff was a bad idea in every sense of the word. They could have expanded on the exploring. They could have given players a sense of euphoria to discover new things on multiple playthroughs with live selection. It's some things that this game does better than the original from a gameplay perspective, which is absolutely enjoyable on all fronts. However, I still feel like the original had a better perspective on how content was handled. It wasn't all perfect. I still prefer A and B scenarios over what the original RE3 had to offer with live selection, which still made Resident Evil 3 painstakingly short in comparison. In no means would I choose the option to cut live selection out over not doing anything expansive with it. There was no justifying the removal of live selection, not a single one. Live selection allowed you to see multiple scenarios of the story just by making a simple choice. Yes, one person could say that it was weird to have an inverted flash pop up as a choice. Capcom still could have modernized the feature as a more natural integration that would have allowed player freedom upon seeing multiple situations. It would have allowed the player to hurry up, think fast, or let the game continue for you. If you don't stop the break in the subway, for example, then imagine Jill taking some damage if you decide to do nothing. Instead, this is gone now for a more consistently shorter narrative, quote unquote. What if I wanted to see Nemesis kill Nikolai? What if Carlos gives me ammo in one section? What if an alternate route had a new area to explore? What if I wanted to see Nemesis killing Brad? And depending on your options, you can make either Carlos or Jill spawn at the RPD. There's a bit of a stark reality to the situation, which boils down to this: you can't see some of these choices unless you play the original game. That's fine. To reiterate, of course, I understand they're doing a completely new game with this remake with the old game as a blueprint to reference back and forth. It's still disappointing that this wasn't considered for the remake. There's even been some cut corners with the weapons, like enhanced ammo and gun parts for the STI Eagle plus the Western shotgun has also been omitted. Granted, you have a lot of other weapon parts to compensate. The shotgun has more parts, I believe, but it doesn't feel the same, especially if you want those rare drops. I don't think that Nemesis dropping some flame rounds isn't as great as it could have been over giving you some new weapons. I will admit that I thought upgrading the Magnum was a nice add-on, as well as making the mine rounds a bit more convenient to be loaded into the grenade launcher. That being said, I gotta ask the common question, where is the freeze rounds? Where is Waldo? Where is our munitions types? Where is the weapons that was in the previous game that were dropped? Where is all this stuff? Because I can't find it, and I think Capcom is being lazy when they could have modified this to make the gunplay a little bit more varied overall. The boss fights are okay, with the exception of Nemesis playing DK bongo drums on your head during Inferno, but I digress. I think that Capcom really needs to finally understand that you need iframes. I'm talking about iframes, the stuff that keeps you invincible when you're getting hit for a while to let the player get back up. We need iframes once you're stun locked repeatedly so we can avoid these situations of Jill constantly eating shit while she's on the ground and I can't do anything. I can't dodge, I can do nothing. We need this stuff to happen in future RE games. I didn't like the lack of iframes in RE6 and I don't like it here. I think that's also just an oversight. And if Nemesis has a speed buff and he's wailing on me and I can't get up, what am I supposed to do? I can't do shit. All I could do on Inferno against Final Nemesis if I get hit is possibly restart or do it over again or load a save because it's so goddamn annoying it drives me up a wall. Otherwise, apart from some odd camera zoom, I would say that Nemesis was fundamentally straightforward. At least they give you a little bit more room to run around in as opposed to the small enclosed travesty that was Birkin 2 on hardcore. The story is pretty much the same as the original title in certain beats. Jill remains at Raccoon City to do some extra investigation surrounding Umbrella, and Umbrella ships off their strongest tyrant experiment to eliminate STAR's members for good. The remake isn't wholly faithful to the original, but it does add some interesting things that I did appreciate. There are connections to Resident Evil 2 on a more substantial level, like Carlos seeing events that transpire before Leon gets there. There was a piece of connective story tissue that stood out a little bit more than seeing Marvin unconscious on the floor and getting some blurb that he's knocked out in the original. I like that Marvin hesitates on shooting Brad, causing his worldview to warp after making mistakes. I think it just could have been a lot more emotional. It could have had a lot more emotional weight if they did alternate renditions of these scenes. Just imagine, just play in your head that you have the new voice actors, which are fine. I think they are great voice actors. Imagine them reacting to alternate renditions of scenes like Jill spotting Brad's death at the RPD when he gets killed by Nemesis. I think that would have given the actors more chops to work with in emotional scenes. Not to mention, it's kind of weird that Nemesis doesn't get to complete any of his prime directives this time around, but to be fair, killing Chickenheart really isn't anything to write home about since the guy is a coward, let's not lie people. I feel like some of these characterizations are a little bit more superior in the remake in terms of how they are presented. I can't say that Jill isn't a badass, I can't say that Carlos having an enhanced screen presence isn't welcome, and I can't say that Tyrell sticking around longer was not cool as opposed to his original counterpart where he's blown up in seconds. That being said, it's not all perfect on the Western Front. I still feel like some things could have been better. I like Nikolai being a little bit more mischievous in the original as opposed to being like this awkward money man who wants to put Jill in the middle of a contested round and have her tested to fight Nemesis, and he wants to get money from the combat data. I like when Nikolai was a little bit more subtle in the original, where he was killing people, he was doing things for the supervisors, he was doing some pretty fucked up stuff, and you could see that he was definitely a lot more twisted and corrupt by being subtle, and you knew he wasn't someone to mess with. I like that a lot more in the original. I also liked some character aspects in the original with Mikhail Victor, and it felt like he was a disposable character in this game as opposed to his post-traumatic mental breakdowns in the original. However, I guess that he has a good sense of finding out how Nikolai was probably in on like rigging the operation. I think Mikhail says something to the effect of, well, it is funny that they lock gates at convenient locations and that the zombies knew exactly where our positions was going to be. It's funny, no? I really did like that interaction with him and Nikolai. I wish it was more of that. Like, we needed more of that, more questioning the logic of being in this situation and someone possibly screwing it up, and we didn't get a lot of that. I felt like that subtle touch made Mikhail seem really smarter than he looked. It feels like a balancing scale being implemented here with some of the characters. Some of them are done better in the remake, and some of them are done better in the original. The last part I think I want to touch on here is the asymmetrical multiplayer that has been added with Resident Evil 3. This multiplayer is called Resident Evil Resistance. The name of the game is to play as either the mastermind or a group of 4 survivors. The 4 survivors are tasked with objectives across a few maps in order to proceed to the next area. In the meantime, you have to avoid all traps laid out on the map by the mastermind. Once all the objectives are completely finished, then you advance to the next area. Time is particularly a factor for survivors, so I would suggest shooting out cameras or shooting at zombies in order to potentially stack up time and distract the mastermind respectively. As the mastermind, you are mostly on CCTV style cameras trying to delay the heroes from achieving their set objectives, like collecting pieces for a door or smashing biocores for the final area. You get a deck of cards and you can allot points into these set cards to spawn enemies or traps in the area. These decks have to be adjusted accordingly, and the placement has to be pristine in order to gain a victory. There's also skills with each mastermind that has a unique perk to it. When you get a big bioweapon, you can spawn big bioweapons like Mr. X and William Birkin, for example. Resistance can be fun, but it can be somewhat frustrating due to the weird balancing choices. I don't think I need to tell you that the mismatching of high ranked players versus low ranked players is horrendous to deal with. If they update the meta for the better, then some potential could be had with this game in the long run. I do think this mode will not cater to you if you don't like online multiplayer outside of co-op. This is mostly for people who favor high level decks, card-based gameplay, or team survival gameplay. The modes are limited, so there's not much variety to Resident Evil Resistance outside of being a mastermind or survivor. Also, with the peer-to-peer servers, you will have a longer wait time in the queue with some matches. I would suggest Capcom getting on the ball with that immediately to fix it with dedicated servers, new modes, and crossplay if they want to extend the life of Resident Evil Resistance. The game is fun, but it is broken and the meta is out of control now. Capcom doesn't seem to know what they want to do with either making the mastermind buffed out or making the survivors buffed out at high level play, and it's really weird when you think about it. They need to balance things out more accordingly in the future. It's all about what kind of pesky situation the other person can initiate first. Either way, they'll either keep the lifeblood of Resistance going by doing more positive updates, or it's going to be something that has a flat line if they keep doing negative updates. Don't be like Ubisoft with Rainbow Six Siege. Negative updates will bury a meta for good. The game does have a roadmap, and fingers crossed that Nikolai will bring Nemesis into the equation. They already released Jill and some people are having fun with her, so here's hoping that all of this stuff is balanced accordingly as more updates roll out. Overall, Resident Evil 3 is an awesome game, yet it reimagines way too much and it subtracts more than it adds. It strays from its roots, which is a little bit more than I would have appreciated, but the enhancements that M2 gave it was something that was fun from a gameplay perspective. This is built on a few key conventions with the action horror drive from the original, which I felt was done really well in this remake. I feel like a director's cut, a giant patch, would probably remedy a lot of these issues. Make a gold edition, re-release the game with more content brimming in the package. As it stands now, you will have omitted content that prides itself on resistance and replaying the game multiple times at a high skill level. The casual gamer will probably pass on that prospect, and the diehard Resident Evil Remake 2 fan will enjoy the updated gameplay, yet they will be left wanting more. The lack of costumes, live selection, and features from the original will all be brought into the equation when you question it. Superior gameplay and enhanced characters will be just enough to recommend a sale. I think if you want a meteor product, then I would recommend Resident Evil 2 Remake with no question. Even if most RE games are short, it should have been more content here to recommend going back to RE3 Remake. I didn't care much for the Mercenaries Operation Mad Jackal in the original. I'm sorry guys, I thought it was bare bones with very little stage variety previously. I think they could have still done something to give that single player enthusiast more initiative to play it, since For Survivor was in the package for Resident Evil 2 Remake anyway, and that was kept. If you want superior gameplay and you like modernized controls and you like how Resident Evil 2 Remake was, then I would recommend getting this game as a diehard Resident Evil fan. If you like superior content and you like all that stuff overall, where you have like intense replay value to go back to multiple modes and experiences, then I would recommend picking up the original Resident Evil 3 or Resident Evil 2 Remake to satisfy your appetites with what they did in that package. That being said, I give this game a 7.2 out of 10. I gave the original RE3 an 8, just for reference if you want to compare scores. It's a good game, but it's not a master class for Resident Evil 3 Remake. Anyway, I am Renegade Operative. That is my review for Resident Evil 3 Remake. Click the links in the description below and check me out on social media. Check out my old reviews. Check out all that stuff. I hope you really enjoyed this video. Be sure to slap a like, comment, rate, subscribe, get your friends in on this, hit that bell notification, and I will see you guys next time. Hopefully you guys are doing safe during the whole COVID-19 situation, and I will see you guys soon. Later, take care, and peace out.